In the heart of an alien jungle, where every leaf seemed to breathe and every shadow felt alive, a single scream tore through the air. Ethan froze. It wasn't human, pushing through glowing vines. He found her, an alien girl, her silver hair, tangled in living roots, being pulled into the gaping mouth of a plant the size of a small house. The petals closed in around her, dripping with a sweet, deadly sap. She reached out one trembling hand, and he had seconds to decide, run, or risk everything to pull her out. The jungle was not quiet. Every leaf seemed to move, even when there was no wind. The air was heavy, almost too thick to breathe. Ethan took slow steps, careful not to disturb the strange plants around him. He had been on many alien worlds before, but this one felt different. It was as if the place was watching him. His boots sank into soft moss that glowed faintly under. Each step, the light came from tiny blue spores floating in the air, like drifting dust. Somewhere far away, something made a sound like a slow heartbeat deep underground. He stopped for a moment listening. The sound faded, but the feeling stayed in his chest. He pulled out his scanner. The small screen showed unusual plant readings. He had come here for a rare herb known to heal almost any sickness. It grew only in the deepest part of this jungle, but the scanner kept picking up other movements too, large shapes shifting in the shadows. A soft breeze passed through, carrying the smell of sweet fruit. Ethan was about to take another step when a sharp sound cut through the air. A short, high cry. It was not the call of an animal. It sounded like fear. His heart skipped. Without thinking, he followed the sound. The glowing plants brushed against his arms as he pushed through, their petals curling as if they didn't want to be touched. The cry came again, weaker this time. The jungle seemed to grow thicker. Tall stems rose like pillars, some with flowers, bigger than his head. They pulsed slowly, opening and closing as if breathing. He stepped around them, eyes searching for the source of the sound. Then he saw her. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin was pale silver, catching the light from the spores like liquid metal. Her hair fell around her shoulders in soft waves, almost white, but shining faintly blue. She looked young, but her eyes wide with fear were old and deep. Vines wrapped around her legs and arms, holding her in place. They were pulling her toward the center of a massive plant. Its open petals formed a deep hollow, glowing faintly pink. Drops of thick, golden liquid slid down the edges, falling into the shadows below. Ethan froze. The vines moved not like normal plants, but like something alive. They tightened and shifted, pulling her slowly closer to the hollow. She reached out one hand toward him, her lips parting as if to speak, but the vines pulled again, and she gasped. He stepped forward, but the ground beneath his boot shifted. He looked down. The moss rippled, and something under it slid away quickly, almost like it had been waiting for him. Ethan took another step, keeping his eyes on the girl. He could see her struggling, but her movements were slowing. It was as if the air around the plant was heavier, harder to move through. The plant's petals began to close, just slightly, as though it knew it had what it wanted. The golden drops fell faster now. A faint humming sound rose from deep within. A slow rhythm that made the hair on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. He glanced at his scanner, but the screen flickered and went dark. Something in the air was interfering with it. The girl's eyes locked on his, and for a moment, the jungle seemed to fade away. There was only her silent plea. Ethan reached for the small blade at his side. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, only that he couldn't stand there and watch. The vines pulled her another few inches toward the center. Her hair brushed against the petal's edge, and a faint shimmer of dust fell into the hollow. A sudden shadow passed over him, moving across the ground like a slow wave. He looked up. Something massive was shifting among the taller plants. The stems bent, and leaves turned, as if they were all leaning toward this spot. The air grew warmer. Ethan's pulse quickened. He stepped forward again, careful not to trip on the roots that twisted under the moss. His foot brushed against one, and it twitched. The shadow grew darker, and the humming from the plant deepened, almost like a voice. The vines around the girl lifted her slightly, pulling her higher above the ground. She let out a small sound, barely more than a whisper. Ethan knew he had only moments before the petals closed completely. He moved closer, eyes scanning for a weak point in the twisting vines. The jungle around him seemed to hold its breath, just as he reached the edge of the glowing petals. The ground trembled beneath him. The moss rippled again, but this time it didn't slide away, it rose up, as if something underneath was pushing through. A deep, slow growl echoed through the air. Ethan froze, his eyes flicking between the girl and the shifting ground. Whatever was moving below was coming up fast. The vines pulled tighter. The petals closed another inch. The shadow above him spread wider, covering the light from the spores, and then, with a sound like tearing leaves, something enormous began to rise from the ground. Ethan didn't move. The ground beneath his boots felt alive, shifting in slow, deliberate motions. A soft rumble passed through the soil, almost like breathing. The glowing spores in the air drifted away. As if avoiding something, the girl's eyes were still on him, but now there was a flicker of urgency. She tried to speak, her lips moving silently, but the vines around her tightened, pulling her another small step toward the center of the giant petals. The golden drops falling from the edges seemed to thicken, glowing brighter, and the air around them carried a sweet, heavy scent. Ethan glanced around, searching for anything that could help him. His scanner was still dead, and the plants nearby were swaying slowly, even though no breeze touched them. The movement wasn't random, it felt as if they were reacting to what was happening. A faint rustling sound came from behind him. He turned and saw the tall stems parting in the distance, making way for something large that moved with a steady, deliberate pace. The shape was hard to see through the dim light, but its presence made the air feel heavier. The girl let out another faint sound, her voice trembling. Ethan's attention snapped back to her. The petals were beginning to close more quickly now. Folding in like slow, cautious hands, he stepped forward, but the moss beneath his foot lifted slightly, forcing him to pull back. The rumble beneath him grew stronger. He could feel it rising from deep below, shaking the roots and vines around him. The plants seemed to respond, their leaves curling inward, their colors shifting slightly. As though preparing for something, Ethan's mind raced. He knew he couldn't simply cut through the vines, they looked like they would grow back instantly. He needed a distraction, something to make the plant release her on its own. But what? His eyes darted to a nearby tree with thick, glassy sap dripping from its bark. The liquid glowed faintly, much like the drops on the petals, but the color was a deeper shade of blue. He stepped toward it, but the moss under him pulsed again. Stopping him in his tracks, a shadow passed over the girl, and Ethan looked up to see another large shape moving between the glowing stems. Its movements were smooth and almost silent, except for a low vibration that seemed to hum through the ground. It wasn't just one plant here. There was something else, something watching, perhaps even waiting. The girl's hands moved slightly, her fingers curling as if trying to signal him. He didn't understand the meaning, but he could sense her desperation. The petals were nearly halfway closed now, and her body was almost inside the hollow. Ethan felt the ground rise again, this time more sharply. The moss split in one spot, revealing a tangle of roots that shifted as if searching. He stepped back quickly, avoiding their touch. He looked at the glowing sap once more and made a quick decision. Pulling the small container from his belt, he darted toward the tree. The ground seemed to react instantly, rippling under his boots. But he reached the bark and pressed the container against the flow of sap. It filled quickly, the thick liquid swirling inside like moving light. As he turned back toward the girl, he noticed the humming sound from the giant petals had changed. It was sharper now, more alert. As though the plant sensed his actions, Ethan stepped forward carefully, holding the container in his hand. He had no idea if the sap would work, but it was the only thing he had. He took another step, and the vines holding the girl twitched, as if warning him away. The air between him and the plant shimmered faintly, like heat rising from sand. The petals slowed their movement for a moment, then continued to close. Ethan's heart pounded. He could feel time slipping away. The girl's eyes met his once more, and there was something in them now, trust, mixed with fear. The ground shifted again, but this time, the movement didn't come from beneath him. It came from deeper in the jungle, where the tall stems swayed in a wide arc. Something massive was approaching, and its pace was quickening. Ethan realized he was running out of moments. He needed to act before both the plant and whatever was coming reached him. He took one final step closer, lifting the container of glowing blue sap, ready to try the only plan he had. But before he could move further, a deep vibration rolled through the air, and the petals froze completely. The jungle became still. Even the glowing spores hung motionless, as though caught in an invisible pause. And then, from between the towering stems, another enormous shape emerged. Its outline barely visible in the dim light, but its presence was impossible to ignore. Ethan stood completely still, his breath slow and quiet. The air felt thick, almost heavy enough to press against his chest. The new shape moving through the tall stems was unlike anything he had seen before. It was larger than the giant plant holding the girl, yet it moved without sound, its form half hidden by the soft glow of the jungle. The first plant's petals remained frozen, as though it sensed the arrival of this other presence. The vines holding the girl no longer pulled her closer, but they did not release her either. She stayed suspended above the hollow, her silver hair falling like a sheet of light, her eyes fixed on something behind Ethan. He turned his head slowly. Through the glowing haze, the newcomer came into view. Its petals were wider, its color darker, almost a deep crimson with faint streaks of gold. Instead of golden drops falling from its edges, it gave off a faint mist that curled downward like smoke. The air seemed to change around it, warmer, more charged. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't a random meeting. It felt like the two plants were aware of each other, maybe even competing. If they were both after the same thing, then maybe, just maybe, he could use that to his advantage. The ground beneath his boots shifted again, but this time the movement wasn't sharp. It was slow, steady, as though the soil itself was preparing for something. The moss around him curled inward, and several nearby stems bent toward the center. As if drawn by an invisible pull, the girl's eyes darted between the two massive plants. She seemed to understand something he didn't. Her fingers twitched against the vines, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw the larger plant respond, its petals trembling slightly. The blue sap in his container glowed softly in his hand. He didn't know if it could harm the plant or help him free her. But now there was another problem. If he acted too soon, the second plant might take her instead. The second plant moved closer, its long vines gliding over the ground like water. They did not move quickly, but their reach was immense. One vine brushed against a nearby glowing flower, and the smaller plant seemed to shrink away from the touch. Ethan took a careful step back, trying to keep distance from both of them. The petals of the first plant twitched again, and the humming sound returned, louder now, almost like a challenge. The second plant responded with a faint, low vibration that he could feel in his bones. It was as if the two giants were speaking to each other. Without words, the girl suddenly made a small sound, urgent, almost pleading, and shook her head at him. He couldn't understand the language, but her eyes said enough. Not yet. He stayed where he was, every sense alert. The two plants began to move in slow arcs, circling each other. Their vines brushed together, and where they touched, the air shimmered faintly, sending ripples across the glowing spores. Ethan realized this was his opening. If they became focused on each other, even for a moment, he could reach the girl. But it was a dangerous balance. Too much movement from him might draw their attention back. He crouched slightly, keeping low, and shifted one step closer to her. The ground here was softer, and the moss gave way under his weight. With a faint sigh, neither plant reacted immediately. Their focus remained locked on each other. The humming from the first plant grew faster, higher, almost urgent. The second plant's vibrations deepened, like distant thunder. The vines tightened around the girl, then loosened again, as if the plant holding her was unsure whether to keep her or defend itself. Ethan took another step, his eyes fixed on the gap between the petals. The girl's hand was only a few steps away now. He could almost reach her if he lunged. Then, without warning, the second plant struck. One of its long crimson vines lashed forward, not at Ethan, but at the petals of the first plant. The impact sent a ripple through the ground, and the petals flared open wider than before. The girl gasped as the vines around her shifted. For a heartbeat, Ethan saw her free arm drop toward him. He moved forward quickly, gripping her wrist before the petals could close again. But as soon as he touched her, the humming from both plants changed. The sounds overlapped, the vibration shaking the soil beneath them. The vines tightened again, not just around the girl, but now curling toward Ethan's legs. He held on to her, refusing to let go, but the ground was moving faster now. The moss rippling in every direction. The two plants were no longer only focused on each other. They were both turning toward him. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he realized his time had run out. If he didn't act within the next few breaths, neither of them would be leaving this jungle floor. The air felt heavier than before, as if the whole jungle had taken a slow, deep breath and was holding it. Ethan's grip on the girl's wrist tightened, not out of force, but from the simple need to keep her close. Her fingers were warm against his, a sign that she was still strong enough to hold on. The ground beneath them rolled gently, like the surface of a calm ocean before a storm. Strange patterns of light began to swirl across the moss, forming shapes he didn't recognize. Some looked like curling leaves, others like flowing water. The glow shifted in color, from soft green to pale gold. As if reacting to the tension between the two massive plants, the crimson plant leaned forward, its mist curling in thin ribbons. Toward the girl, the first plant, the one that had caught her, pulled her slightly back as if to shield her. Ethan could feel an invisible current passing between them, not just in the ground but in the air itself. The girl's eyes flickered toward the container in his hand, the one holding the faintly glowing blue sap. She gave a quick, subtle nod, then looked toward the petals of the crimson plant. Ethan understood just enough to know she was guiding him. He moved slowly, keeping his body low so as not to draw too much attention. Each step pressed the moss softly, releasing a gentle, sweet scent. Around them, smaller plants bent away, clearing a narrow path as though they too were watching. The humming returned, this time from both plants together. It wasn't harsh or sudden, it was deep and steady, almost like a conversation. Ethan imagined it was a language of vibrations, one he couldn't understand, but could feel through the soles of his boots. He reached out his free hand and let a single drop of the blue sap fall onto the moss. The effect was immediate. The moss brightened, and the swirling patterns shifted toward the base of the crimson plant. The mist around it wavered, as though the plant had been distracted. The first plant loosened its vines slightly, enough for the girl to step forward a fraction. Ethan pulled her gently, careful not to force her, letting her move when the vines allowed. Every small motion felt like part of a delicate rhythm, as though rushing would break the pattern. A warm breeze drifted through the clearing, carrying with it the faint sound of distant water. The girl's gaze softened, and Ethan felt her grip strengthen, as if she knew they were closer to safety. But the crimson plant had noticed the shift. Its petals widened, revealing a soft inner glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The moss between Ethan and the crimson plant rippled in perfect circles, each one expanding outward. The girl whispered something, 3 short syllables, in a voice like flowing water. The first plant responded, its vines curling protectively round them, but not to hold them back. Instead, it was guiding them toward a narrow gap between the tall, glowing trees. Ethan understood now. This wasn't a battle between the plants, it was a negotiation. The first plant was willing to let her go, but only if they moved before. The crimson one decided otherwise. He stepped toward the gap, keeping the girl close. The light ahead was brighter, almost white, filtering down from high above the canopy. The air felt fresher here, less heavy. Behind them, the humming faded slightly, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves. They passed through the narrow space between the trees, and for the first time since entering the clearing, Ethan could see more of the jungle beyond. The plants here were smaller, their colors softer. The ground was firmer, no longer shifting beneath their feet. The girl let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing. She glanced back once, then turned her gaze forward, as if eager to leave the clearing behind. Ethan followed her lead, but in his mind, questions were already forming. Why had the first plant released her? Why had the second appeared at all? And why did the blue sap seem to matter so much to both of them? Somewhere deep in the jungle, The faint humming still echoed, not as a threat, but as a reminder that this strange, breathing world was far from finished with them. The forest ahead opened into a place unlike any Ethan had seen so far. The canopy thinned, letting streaks of pale light slip through, scattering across pools of still water that mirrored the leaves. Above, the air was warmer here, touched by a faint, floral fragrance that seemed to calm the heart. The girl walked beside him now, no longer pulled by vines or held back by unseen forces. Her steps were light, but her eyes scanned everything with the sharpness of someone who had lived here far longer than he could imagine. Every so often, she would glance at him, as if measuring whether he could keep pace. The moss underfoot gave way to a soft carpet of tiny, silver leaves that shimmered when touched. Ethan bent down for a moment, brushing his fingers against them, and a delicate glow followed his hand, fading slowly as he lifted it away. The girl gave a small smile at his curiosity. Though her expression quickly returned to one of focus, they moved between tall, spiral-shaped trees whose bark twisted like ropes. Each carried thin strands of light along their surface, pulsing gently. Ethan realized the patterns were in sync with the girl's movements, as though the forest itself recognized her. Far ahead, a thin ribbon of mist curled upward from the ground. The girl pointed toward it, her expression softening for the first time. Ethan followed without question, but the path narrowed until they were walking between walls of pale vines that arched overhead like a tunnel. The air here felt different, cooler, quieter, almost expectant. Halfway through, Ethan noticed that the ground beneath the vines was unlike the rest of the jungle. It was made of smooth, interlocking plates, each with faint markings etched into them. He slowed, tracing the designs. With his eyes, they looked almost like maps, but not of any place he knew. The girl stopped too, kneeling to touch one of the plates. As her fingers brushed the marks, the entire section gave off a soft blue light, and a low hum filled the tunnel. The vines above trembled slightly, releasing tiny droplets of dew that caught the light like falling stars. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a tunnel, it was some kind of ancient path, hidden beneath the living jungle. Whoever had made it must have known how to shape the plants and stone to live together as one. The girl looked back at him and spoke a single word in her language. Her tone wasn't urgent, but it carried weight, as though she was naming something important. Ethan didn't understand the meaning, but he nodded, sensing it was not a place for loud questions. As they stepped forward, the hum grew warmer, richer, almost like a melody. The markings on the plates shifted subtly, flowing like liquid into new patterns. The vines began to open ahead, revealing the source of the mist, a wide, shallow pool fed by streams of water that trickled down from glowing stones above. The girl knelt by the pool, dipping her hands into the water and lifting them to her face. Ethan followed, crouching at the edge. The water was cool, carrying a faint, soothing taste when he took a sip. It wasn't just refreshing, it felt energizing, as though each drop carried some quiet strength. For a few minutes, they rested there in silence, the only sound the gentle flow of water. But Ethan couldn't shake the sense that they weren't entirely alone. The plants here were still, yet he felt the same unseen awareness he had back in the clearing when they finally rose to leave. The girl looked toward the far side of the pool, where a single arch of intertwined branches marked another path forward. She started walking toward it, but before they passed through, she turned to him and gave a faint, almost knowing smile. Whatever lay ahead, Ethan realized, was not just another part of the jungle. It was somewhere that held the answers to why she had been trapped and why the forest had allowed her to leave. Ethan followed the girl beneath the arch of branches, stepping into a part of the jungle that felt older than anything they had seen before. The air here was still and cool, carrying a faint, earthy scent, as if the ground itself had been keeping secrets for centuries. The light filtering through the canopy was softer, tinted with shades of gold and pale green, as though the sun had been carefully filtered by the leaves. The path ahead was narrow but clear, lined with plants whose petals were folded tight, as if they were sleeping. Some glowed faintly from within, their light pulsing in a slow rhythm that almost matched the beat of a heart. Every step they took seemed to stir the air, and in the distance, faint sounds echoed, whispers that might have been wind or perhaps something else. The girl walked with a quiet certainty, though she paused often to glance at the plants, touching some gently as they passed. Ethan noticed how each one reacted to her presence. Petals shifted slightly. Vines untangled themselves, and the soft light brightened for a moment before dimming again. They came to a large clearing, but unlike the others they had crossed, this one was perfectly circular. At its center stood a tall, slender tree with bark as smooth as glass, its surface reflecting the light like water. High above, its leaves formed a dome, their undersides shimmering with a silver glow. Round its roots, streams of crystal clear water trickled into small pools, creating a delicate network of ripples that spread outward. The girl stepped forward and placed her hand against the trunk. The moment she did, a soft vibration hummed through the ground. Ethan felt it in his feet, then in his chest. The tree's silver light grew stronger, casting long patterns across the clearing, almost like writing. Ethan couldn't read them, but he had the strange sense that they weren't just random shapes. They moved slowly, shifting into new forms as though telling a story. The girl watched closely, her lips moving slightly as if she was silently reciting something she already knew. Without speaking, she motioned for him to kneel beside one of the pools. Ethan did as she asked, leaning over the water. What he saw wasn't just his reflection, it was a vision of the jungle, but not as it was now. The plants were taller, brighter, and there were no gaps in the canopy. The air in the vision seemed alive with light, and in the center stood the same tree, but it was much younger. The image shifted, showing the blue sap Ethan had used earlier. He saw it dripping from a wound in a branch, and the moment it touched the ground, the plants nearby began to change, growing stronger, moving with purpose. It was as if the sap carried not just life, but awareness. The vision faded, replaced by his own reflection again. The girl was watching him, her expression calm but knowing. She pointed toward a narrow path on the far side of the clearing. Ethan hesitated. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he understood now that everything they had experienced, the plants, the humming, even the strange way the jungle seemed to breathe, was connected to this place. Whatever was beyond that path might not just answer his questions. It might change the way he saw this world entirely. He glanced once more at the silver-lit tree, feeling the hum fade slowly into silence. Then he followed the girl, stepping into the unknown with the quiet certainty that the journey was far from over.